This person writes, is crying a turnoff for most women? Hmm. Okay, so I grew up in a household where my dad didn't believe in crying, and that was really kind of, I think, instilled from his dad. He mentions to me that he'd never seen his dad ever cry, and I don't think I've ever seen my dad ever cry either. So it's like, um, he had that kind of belief that maybe crying was weak or crying was bad. And from what I've observed in some of the most strong and tough and just incredible people in the world, that they cry so much. So, who I'm referring to is someone like Tony Robbins. It's like, look how much he cries. And it's like, what you really have to understand is that it's really a completion of that stress cycle. And it's like, once you allow yourself to release that stress, it's like you can start again. It's almost like a recharge. And I also watched an interview just a few days ago with the Iron Cowboy. And what he did was I won't spoil the very end, but it was called a Conquer 100. And so what he did was he did 100 Ironmen in 100 days. And the feasibility of that is just almost uncomprehendable, how somebody could actually withstand that. And what he said was he cried every single day. And so I do believe that there is a strong use to crying. And I believe that it's a release. And I think that if women are turned off by that, it's like they don't really understand it, or they have some kind of belief that, oh, men shouldn't cry, and some kind of belief that they basically been instilled by somebody in their life. Um, and I just think it's really limitation if you don't allow yourself to cry. Now, that being said, I don't believe that it's a turn on if somebody is like crying and saying, oh, I'm a victim. And so there's a difference between that. And so it's like a difference between saying, like, oh, I'm crying because it's like I don't know what to do and I'm uncertain and I'm just coming unglued and I don't know how to handle myself, versus I went through some tough ass shit, or I just basically completely was on the same page with another person who felt something or went through something so difficult. And I have experienced that extreme empathy with another person, and that causes me to cry and weep for this other person, because it's like I am completely feeling what this other person's feeling, and I'm going through that same experience with them in that moment. And so I think there are different contexts to um, why people, well, different contexts to crying. And so if you're just coming unglued and maybe always talking about your problems and, oh, look at me, it's like, I'm such a victim and everything's out to get me, and you're crying like that I see as a major turnoff, and I see that as very weak. Or if you're just uncontrollably sobbing over something that's just like a little bit unnecessary, you're making something into a bigger deal than it is, when it's kind of like this victim mentality, like this victim cry. I think that is can be communicated as weakness. Um, but I think on the flip side, it is the most, well, I mean, just coming from those guys, it's like, well, why did they do it? Because it's like they go through so much. Those two guys, like Tony Robbins and the Iron Cowboy, um, it's just like sometimes it's like that's maybe the most strong thing you could do, is just release that. And then why? Because it's like you get to start again, and it's almost like you release that, and then you have the courage to go face that again, and then you cry, complete that stress cycle, and then face that pain. I mean, could you imagine going through 100 Ironman? And research that, because look at the end. I won't tell you, um, but research what he did after he completed the 100 Ironman in 100 days. Um, so that's really what I have to say as far as on men crying. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that below in the description. So post them down below. And if you feel inclined, you can get the products I've got there in the description as well.